ቅዱስ 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 እግዚአብሔር ጸባኦት አምላክነ
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This program is brought to you by Mahibere Kidusan Broadcast Service, American Center, English Service here in the Washington, D.C. studio. We're excited today to introduce you to a very special guest. She's going to tell us about her unique journey to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and her special service within the church today. Our guest is Menet, Emahoy Woletta Sellassie Black, the mother of Monastery or abbess of Menet, Salam, Covenant of Mercy, Covenant of Peace, EOTC Hermitage and Monastery. Emahoy, we're blessed to have you with us.
Amasaganala. I also would like to thank you and also the MK US Media and Broadcasting English Division for having me today.
Thank you, Emma. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and where and how you currently serve?
Yes. Well, a little bit about myself. My name is Emahoy Woletta Sellassie, and I was baptized in the Holy Trinity Church, the Mother Church here in America in 2007 by the hands of Qasis Ephraim, who's currently the head priest of that church, along with Abba Furka Mariam, and at the time, Deacon Amdi Zion. But I was not always a member of the Orthodox Church. I was born a Christian, but I was born and raised a Baptist Christian. My family originally is from Mississippi, and we always have been farmers. My grandparents had 15 children, and then they moved north to Rockford, Illinois, and settled on a corn farm there, where I was born in the rural city. And so, we would go to church every day. On Sundays, we're in church all day, from 6 a.m. to 6 at night, and it always ended with a family fellowship meal. And, now being Orthodox, I can still see some of those similarities from how I was raised as a Christian and then moved over to Orthodoxy. And so roughly around, I think, 2000 or so, I learned of the EOTC Orthodox Church. And I was actually in Ghana at the time. I was in school for 3 years there, and then I ended up working in the country for an additional 4 years. And I was evangelized in the Orthodox Church from an Ethiopian lady there named Menet. And she's the one that really started me on this path, on this journey to Orthodoxy. And I truly pray to God that he invites her to the kingdom of heaven, because I'm sure she doesn't know I ended up being an Emahoy.
Could you tell us a little bit more? I think that's an interesting story. How did you meet her, and what was it that she said that kind of put a seed in you to start thinking about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church?
Yes. It was a combination of things. At that point in time in my life, I was searching for something more. Like I said, I grew up Christian, but there was just something that was kind of a disconnect from what I was reading in the Bible and then to what I can physically see happening around me in my community and in my society. And there was just a disconnect. So when I finally, do go to Ghana to go to school and to work, I was at Labadi Beach at that time, which is on the Atlantic. And I was there just coping with my ancestors being taken away during the transatlantic slave trade. And this was the very waters in which boats seized them, held them in chains, and brought them over, to the New World. And so as I'm standing there on the beach, I get just a thought to go to leave. But as I'm leaving across the street from the beach, there's like a huge parking lot, various of small shops and eateries and different things like that. And one store in particular caught my attention. They had a lot of beautiful long white dresses with flowing shawls with different colors and different things like that. So it caught my attention. And so I entered that shop, and I was the only one there. And I'm looking at all of these beautiful garments there. And when I turned around, there was this little lady standing there, dressed beautifully, all in white. She had beautiful shawls. At the time, I didn't know anything about what I was actually seeing, but it was beautiful to me how she was dressed and the different clothes that I saw. And she said, "Hello, how are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine." And then she invited me to have coffee and popcorn. So I said, "Sure, why not?" So she sits me down at this small little table. She brings out popcorn. She brings out another little table with all these little dainty little cups and a little coffee pot. And, she's pouring me coffee and she's giving me popcorn. And it was at that time she says to me, "Do you know about the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church?" I said, "No." And she said, "When you get back to your country, look for them." And that's all she said to me. And I'm just pondering this in my mind. I'm just like, okay, I've never heard of these words before. And so I finished my coffee, I finished my popcorn. I ended up going back to my home there. And shortly later, I ended up catching brain malaria, cerebral malaria, and almost dying in Ghana. And so my host family couldn't do anything but to take me to the U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy right away sent me back to America. Within 3 days, I was back home in the hospitals recovering from malaria. And so in my recovery state, the words of this lady pops up in my mind. "Do you know about the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church?" And so as I'm thinking about it, eventually I get a little strength and I'm released. I go home, and that's when I started searching for this church that I heard. So again, like I said, I'm sure she doesn't know that I probably ended up becoming an Emahoy, but I truly pray to God that he invites her to the kingdom of heaven.
Absolutely. I always love hearing that story. And so you're an American born, raised here in the US, and you're not only a member of the EOTC now, but you're also a nun and an Menet, right? So that's a huge jump. And Miss Gannet, wherever she is, we thank her too for, for leading you to our church. But what made you, once now you've woken up, you have your strength, what made you make the jump? What made you start then, after you've learned, say, this is the church I'm going to be a part of, and then enter the Ethiopian church or to get baptized? What was the process like after you got well?
So what happened to make the jump? I grew up Christian. And so, again, there was a disconnect that I was struggling with, from my youth to my teenage to my early adult life. And so once I learned about the Orthodox Church, it intrigued me. I'd never heard of Orthodoxy before. And I'm sure or I'm sure you've come across people here in America or America in general don't know about the Orthodox Church, yet alone the various aspects of Orthodoxy, from the Eastern Orthodox to the Oriental Orthodox, and and things like that. So after my baptism, it was always to learn more, to seek more, to understand more about the things of God. that the words that I was reading, they had to have some kind of not only historical context, but also a reality. And so I was always, trying to search and to find out and seek. Right after my baptism in 2007, I was blessed to go to Ethiopia and to live in Ethiopia. And I did for 4 months right after baptism. And it was a blessing because what I saw then was the scriptures living and walking around me as I was there. You walk down the streets and you can smell the incense. You can hear the chants. You can see people dressed in their religious garbs as they're going to church or standing near the church or by the church, even standing at their doors, listening to Kadasi. And so all of that make me to understand that maybe what I have just chosen to do after I was invited, that maybe this is the way in which I've been looking for, even from a young age, that I can actually live this out versus just reading it from the pages. I maybe you have come across this before, but in America, people have the Bible, they have the Word of God, but that disconnect is the church. The how do you live out that daily life of scripture? How do you live out the daily life of the commandments of God in community, within yourself, within your home? And so I began to see that in Ethiopia. I also began to see people there who kind of stood out. They were not always in their white Natala or their white religious garb. They were in other colors like orange and brown and red and grays and even purples, depending on the season. I didn't know who these individuals were, but I just knew that they were different. Even when I was in Ethiopia, the first time around after my baptism, I had a chance to study at the patriarchal library that is there. There's a library within the patriarchal office, and right in a few feet from there is also the Ethiopian Millennium Museum, where I was blessed to study in. At the time, I was still an anthropologist and still writing various of books and different things like that. So I had an opportunity to study there as well, and so that gave me the historical context of my newly regained faith, or my newly regained closeness in my walk with God. And so when I came back to America, I was just completely changed. Right up until then, a little bit more about my background. I was working with the United Nations and with the African Union, and I was the executive secretary of an organization called African Unity of Harlem. And so we worked with various of Africans in the diaspora right in their communities, and working with them gain access to their dignitaries who are here in America through the UN and through the AU to try to help them to get resources in the community. Well, by the time I come back from Ethiopia, I'm completely changed. My mind is so engulfed in wanting to be in the church and live in the church and go to Kadase every day and to read the Psalms. I began to forsake my work. I would get calls asking, why aren't you in the office? And we have a paper to write. We have a grant to write. Why are you not here? And I couldn't give an answer other than, I'm in church. And eventually I quit all of my work and was blessed to actually move into Holy Trinity Church and to help keep it clean, to help keep it fresh and cleaned and different things like that. And I saw that was like a sign from God, that God was saying, I see you, I see your prayers. I invite you yet again closer to walk with me. And I had a strange idea to just be in the church. And then I began, someone told me, oh, you seem more like an Emahoy. And I didn't know what an Emahoy was. So I searched and looked out, and lo and behold, it is a title given to women who become nuns within the church. And so when I saw that, I began to ask and to seek from my spiritual father at the time, maybe this is something that God is calling me to. So the jump from being baptized and then going over to considering to be an Emahoy was my experience that I lived while in Ethiopia, always being in church and always being with the Word of God on your mind and in your thoughts, and walking and living. So I desired that, and that's what carried me over. And by time His Eminence Abuna Zacharias arrived to New York in 2009, that was the key cornerstone that sealed everything up. And so my father, confessor, introduced us together, and then it would be under Abuna Zacharias that he would accept my entry into the monastic life.
You're watching a program brought to you by Mahibere Kidusan Broadcast Service, American Center English Service. We hope you continue to watch. So you mentioned His Eminence Abuna Zacharias. Can you tell us a little bit more about him and how he has guided your path, especially to becoming an Emahoy, and what was the process like for you when you were being consecrated as a nun, and how did he guide you?
Well, Abuna Zacharias is the first archbishop, that I understood what an archbishop was. Here in America, we have known of Tawahedo since the late 1800s and officially established in the early 1900s. And so there are those before me who have had experiences with archbishops, but Abuna Zacharias was the first, Bisu Abuna Zacharias was the first archbishop that I was introduced to, and he's the first one who also was a monk. And he's the first one that I had an opportunity to observe. So his guidance, firstly, was just by what he did. He didn't come straight out to teach me about monasticism. As you know, you can't just read a book on monasticism or ascetic life and then think magically you're going to do those things. It actually comes with practice and day to day. So I observed him firstly. And he would wake up at 3:30 in the morning every morning. By this time, I've been blessed to live in the church. And so my cell was on the fourth floor. So I can hear everything downstairs, even to the sanctuary. So I would hear him, how he would wake up at 3:30 in the morning with hymns. He would go from his cell down to the sanctuary every single day without fail. And he would be there for Kadan prayer, for the reading of scriptures, the Tamna Madiyam. He would then, sit down and study the gospel and read the gospel. And he did this all the way up until the time he was then blessed to serve now in Ethiopia. So I first observed him. And this is firstly how he taught me, guided me. There would be times during the day where he would break for lunch. And because at this time now, I have forsaken everything. I left my family. I have no possessions. I have no money. I have no friends. I'm not originally from New York, so no one really knew me, knew who I was. I was just an endearing woman who served the church, and I was invited, to come to help. So, if I ate anything, it would be Abuna Zacharias saying, "Oh, I see that you don't have any food. Let me give you bread to eat." He would give me these big clumps of bread, And I will have that, live for the whole day with this bread. Or if he has injera, he will actually take half of his injera off his plate and he will give to me it right in my hands. So through that, I begin to know humility. I begin to understand and taste real hunger, not having anything, and having someone to have compassion upon you, to then give you food and to give you water. This is how he was guiding me and teaching me. He didn't come sitting down with a book. That began to be later. But he first showed me practically what monasticism is, what humility is, what's compassion, all attributes of what a menekosawid or a menekos should have. Yes. And then from that, I would observe him, how he would read scriptures all day. He would read any holy books that he had in his possession. And because he was here in America, he made an effort to learn all the words he could in English that he then could use and preach and say on the altar for English speakers. He would read and memorize the Kadasi all in English. He would read and memorize the Tamnamadiyam all in English. He would read the Synaxare in English and memorize it. And so when he went to preach and he went to teach us, he would then call from his memory all of the learning he's been doing over the week. So I watched that and I observed that. And by this, he was also guiding me as well. Eventually, he would invite me to his prayer life. And so he would then say to me, oh, you have to be in the church by 3:00, 3:30. I had already seen him do this and hearing him do this. And so I understood, yeah, he's been doing that. So, I desire to have a closer walk with God too. So let me follow him in doing this. So he would invite me to the early morning Kadasi, early morning Kadan prayers. And I would stand there in the sanctuary with him. And then after the Kadan prayer, he would ask me to read the Tamnamadiyam. He would ask me to read the introductions to the Tamnamadiyam. He would even ask me to read a few miracles. He would ask me to read the Synaxare. He invited me into his prayer life. And then this began to show me what I should do early in the morning, how I should read the Tamnamadiyam and the Synaxare. He would even invite me to listen to the gospel readings with him. And I'll sit there while he's reading the gospel. And then he'll ask me, what do you think this gospel is teaching? What do you think it means? And I would give him my humble, mostly wrong interpretation. But then he would give me and teach me from Adempta. And all of this was his guidance towards me. He would do that for 4 years because if you know, in our church, to be a menekos, you can be in the process your whole entire life. But normally, typically, if you're entering monastery, you should go and study for at least 3 to 10 years prior of your consecration. And so Abuna Zakarias would teach me in monastic life for 4 years. And every single day, we will be in church service. Every single day, we will have a meal time. Every single day, there's an evening prayer. And when he saw that I was ready, he sent me to Jerusalem for confirmation. And I thank God that he didn't send me to monastery right off the bat or right off, the top. As I've told you, I'm an American, and so I had no idea or no concepts of monastic life or monasteries. And being a community servant or a community activist, we could be loud, we can be harsh at times, or we can be forceful. And when you're trying to speak for a community, or you're trying to demand rights for society, or if you're trying to fight against injustice and things like that. That's my background. But that's not monastic. that is not ascetic life. My strengths in the world were weaknesses in the church. So I had to take that time to learn humility, to learn compassion, to learn quietness, to learn the ability that if you see wrong, or if someone does wrong to you, how to go and pray about it versus saying something. Abuna Zakaria showed me these things because he lived that monastic life right here in America. He wasn't out in the wilderness here. He wasn't out on the farms here. He was right in the city in Bronx, New York, at our church, Holy Trinity. And he honed in. He lived this monastic spiritual life every single day. He shared that with me. He invited that with me, guided me in that principle. And then after 4 years, he sent me to Jerusalem for confirmation.
I think that's an amazing thing, to be able to have the opportunity to read the gospel and read the Tamara Mariam when you're with a father like that, who can teach you when you're outside the sanctuary, just learning with him. I think that's a great blessing, and thank you for sharing all of that with us. Do you have any advice for young men or women who wish to walk the monastic way? I think a lot of times we learn about marriage, and we're also taught that there is the monastic way. And since we have you here with us today, we wanted to know if you had any advice for anyone who wishes to walk the path that you're currently walking.
Yes. I can only share my experience. I know other monastics and other holy fathers and mothers have written various ways as well. But I can only share my experience as someone, as you say, born here in this country. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to start with yourself. Yeah, you have to start with yourself. If you desire that closer walk with God, then there is a shedding off process that has to happen. There is a self-discipline you have to endure, that you put upon yourself to endure. All of the distractions, like the various TV programs and movies that have nothing to do with the scripture, nothing to do with God, nothing to do with the teachings of the church, one must shed that away from them. TV, music, even reading materials like magazines and different things like that. The reason for it is because, when you're looking at certain things, it entices the mind, and your mind is like a computer. So everything stays there. And even when you're not seeing those things or thinking of those things, sometimes they can pop up in your mind like spam, right? It just pops up out of nowhere because it was introduced by the reading and the listening and the seeing. So you have to shed those things off. Yeah. You have to choose a dedicated time where you're going to go and actually read scriptures, read your Bible. You have to set a time where you're going to pray, what you're going to pray, how you're going to pray. Map all of these things out for yourself so that when that time comes, it can be in the morning or in the afternoon or late at night. Maybe you say, oh, Emahoy, I work, I go to school, I don't have time for that. Well, maybe it's at 1 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's at 5:30 in the morning, or maybe you have a break somewhere and it's, 3 in the afternoon or 3:30 in the morning, or 3:30 in the afternoon, whatever the time may be. You have to set aside, that time where you're committed to then say, I'm going to go and yes, I'm going to read or I'm going to pray certain prayers or read certain scriptures. So you have to have that in your life. Another thing too, what I started to do is that, before I used to dress in a very Afrocentric way. I always wore long clothing and I always, covered my hair. But when I started to understand monasticism and ascetic life, I started then only wearing clothing that was one color. Yes. So my dress would be just a blue dress, or it would be just a black dress or a brown dress. I stopped wearing clothing that was representative to styles and fashions in the world. You know, like when you walk outside and someone says, "Oh, you know, I like that shirt you have on. I like the lace," or I like what you're wearing." You know, because I like the colors or the patterns. I stopped wearing all of those things, and I only started to wear just single colored clothing. And I try to match my clothes. If I'm wearing a blue modest top, long sleeve top, I would then find a long blue skirt to go with it. You know, things like that. So I didn't mix and match my colors. If I'm wearing anything, it's just one single color. So I would suggest those who are trying to live a monastic life or an ascetic life to start with those. Start shedding away the different things that you see, that you hear, that you talk about, and replace that with things of God. Start watching godly sermons, godly preaching, godly shows. Start reading your scriptures, reading books about the saints. Start looking at magazines that are expressive of humanitarian work, even. You know, like if you see a magazine that's talking about feeding the homeless or building shelters, and doing like a good work, and replace your mind with the mind of godliness. Even though you're not a monk or you're not a monk yet, but you can start with those paths. Also start with what you eat. You know, we're in the fasting season. And so, you know, even now we try to keep our foods, you know, very simple with not a lot of flavor in different things. I saw myself even, you know, if I cook any food and I make it one way, however it turns out, I would consume it. You know, sometimes you eat food and you say, "Oh, it needs a little bit more salt. Oh, it needs a little bit more pepper. Oh, it needs a little bit more." If you're trying to walk in that monastic way, try not to have it so flavorful or delicious, I should say, because you're really just eating to satisfy the body's need to have strength. And being a monastic, you definitely need physical strength along with spiritual strength as well. And what I mean by physical strength is that you don't want to faint on the way. That's not the point of eating or consuming lesser food. You want to consume enough food to keep your strength so you can continue your way, if that makes sense. So yeah, they you know, individuals can start like that. Before I went to monastery, again, that's how Abuna Zacarias guided me in that. You know, there was times where I was very hungry and I've never tasted, you know, real hunger. And he would give me like just a chunk of bread. And I was so grateful for that bread. It was so delicious. And I began to be content with that slice of bread. Even recently, I was in monastery with him for 6 months. I returned back in July. And so from July onward, I think to February or even to December, I was in Ethiopia with him in monastery. And my food for 6 months was just a half a piece of injera with shoro. There was no other food. Yeah. Maybe for tensaye, because I was there, I had a little lamb stew with the injera. Yeah. But that was it. That was just that once. All the rest of the time, just shoro and injera. So this is monastic life. You know, you have to eat, but you don't eat for to enjoy delicious food. You know, there's times where it happens on big high holy days, but just to show how even then, when I'm an Emahoy, I'm an Menet, when I went to him, he maintains his humility. He keeps me humble, and I only am served just still in injera with shoro for 6 months, and that's it. So again, yes, those who are looking to walk a monastic life, maybe they have an interest. They can start with those few things.
Okay. Thank you. I think you reminded me of, I remember reading about His Holiness Pope Kyrillos VI in the book A Silent Patriarch, and it spoke about from the time he was 20 to the time he was 25, he essentially lived a monastic life in his room while he was living with his family. So he had this feeling of wanting to be a monk, and he knew that was his path, but at the time it wasn't common for people who were educated in the world to go to the monasteries in Egypt. So this was, I don't know how many years ago, but recent. And he would sleep on the floor. So just for those 5 years, every day he would go to church. After church, he would go to work. After work, he would go to church, learn from a deacon there. He compiled answers from the Bible throughout those 5 years. And his family had no idea what was happening. So I think the book described it as they could see the outer manifestations of the inner monastic emerging, or something like that. He was being different. He wouldn't even allow, and no one was allowed in his room, but he was practicing monasticism. And then once he left and he went to the monastery, it was just a transition. It was a natural transition. It wasn't, just completely, turning off or turning on a switch. So you reminded me of that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you mentioned something about Abuna Zacarias that I want to hit on here. And one of the concerns that the faithful have while living in America, like you said, sometimes in Ethiopia, it's easy because even if you don't want to, you have visual representations of holiness. So it's like a constant reminder, but it's not the same here, right? So we don't necessarily have examples of righteous life kind of walking around us, even though we have the saints. So how do you personally view this, and how do you live a spiritual life in the midst of somewhere like New York or the US or just in the West in general?
Yes, that's a very important question. It's not an easy question because, as you just state, you can't visually see the things of holiness so easily here. What I try to do, and what others should do or should work on if they're not, is that we have to have a focused mind. We have to have a Christian outlook, a Christian perspective every day, every minute, every moment, not just on a Sunday when we go to Kadase, or if your church has other services that you may even go throughout the week, but then as soon as you leave through the door, the mind goes back to whatever worldly interaction, that you are surrounded by. So every moment of your time, you have to keep a Christian mind, a Christian perspective. And that only happens with and by the reading constantly of the Bible. Having room for reading the scriptures every day, even if it's just one chapter, helps to focus your mind. So when you walk outside of your home doors, you have a connection to what you've read or what you're reading, to even then begin to see around you a Christian perspective. Everything is about your outlook here in this country. If your mind is full of today's fashion, the gossip that we heard at school, or what occurred and what happened on the streets or in the house, and we just allow those things to take over us and guide our thinking, guide our mind, it can be very difficult having a spiritual life here in this country. So every single moment, your mind must be in tuned, consciously focused on the things of God, on his words, on his precepts, the commandments, the teachings of the gospels, even the acts. For an example, you're walking down the street in the city, and you're gonna see everything. You may even hear everything in terms of bad ways, bad manners, how people carry themselves, even what they do. Here in New York, if you're walking down the street, people even openly now smoke marijuana because the state has allowed it to be legalized in different things. And if it's not marijuana, they're smoking things that resemble that, you know. So as a Christian trying to live a humble life, you're walking down the street, you have to have that Christian mind, that Christian outlook, where those things are blocked at bay. Because scriptures tells us that Christ came into the world to save mankind from their sins. And we should have an outlook of mercy and compassion on the inhabitants of our society who are outside the grace of God, because maybe they have not met Jesus Christ yet. And so there's times where I'm walking down the street, but as you see me now, I dress and look like this every day. I may not have my Nutella on, but I will still have my medical sawit cob, and I will wear my long veil still. All of my clothes are, long and modest, and I wear my cross. And so with that, they can see, oh, she's different. She's not like the rest of the inhabitants. And so that also helps you. It protects you. It preserves you as you're out here in this world where most of the inhabitants really have not had that interaction or that invitation to meet Christ. So it starts with you. It really does starts with you. You're not going to see people walking with that imagery. You're not going to smell the incense. You're not going to hear the chanting. But in this society, you can still smell the incense in your own heart, in your own mind. You can feel the embrace of God who lives in your heart. You can see God's wondrous works. Sometimes if I'm walking down the street, I will look up. I wouldn't look down. I will look at the sky, the clouds. I would see the little birdies flying around. I would see how the trees are moving in the wind. And I will give praise to God for his creation, even right here in the city where so many different bad things happen. Also, too, when you start with yourself like that in an environment where the things of holiness are not around too much, people, when they see you, they have a different perspective on you. Again, seeing that you're different. I've had opportunities where I would see a group of, so-called bad guys out on the corner, and I'll walk past them and say, "Hello, brothers, how are you?" And they're looking like, "Oh, hello, ma'am. We're fine. We're good. Thank you." Things like that. I've even had people who recognize that I'm a nun and just walk up and say, "Oh, can you pray for me? Can you give me some encouraging words?" So the other point to that too, in this type of environment, you can't judge the people, because everything that we see is because God so said so. And it is up for those of us who are being saved to be his witness, to also bring his message to them, even if we don't say anything, how we carry ourselves, our Christian mind when we're walking around in the streets, our connection to God. They will then see that and then maybe even ask us a question. You see? So a part of my spirituality is always reading the Bible. I grew up reading the Bible. When I became an Orthodox Christian, my teachers have always started with the Bible. And even now that I'm a seminarian in the EOTC Orthodox Seminary, where we're learning the in-depth history, time, places, people, everything concerning the scriptures. So the Bible and the Bible reading, the teachings of Christ, his miracles, all of those things we must read. we must keep them preserved in our hearts. So when we're walking down the road, when we're going to work, when we're going to school in an ungodly environment, the godliness is still within us. That spirituality of God is still in us. And when we go out into the environment, as the scriptures say, we are like a light unto the world. And that's what's going to not only preserve you, it's going to preserve also those around you, because they begin to see something different. And that's the problem here in America. People don't see anything different. Yes, the Bible is here in this country, but they have not seen the actual church of Jesus Christ. You can't just have the word of God and not also have the church. It goes hand in hand. And so the biggest problem we face in this country is that where is the true church? And I'm not just speaking about, that place you go, but also where is the true witness of Jesus Christ? And we're those witnesses. And when we go out to the community, we must present that Christian perspective to the world and allow a sinless environment, an ungodly environment, to have a piece of godliness in it through our representation.
Thank you. Thank you, Emahoy. We have come to the conclusion of part 1 of our interview with Emahoy. Please join us next week as we continue the second and final part of our interview. We wish you have a blessed rest of the Great Lent Fast.
ብሔር ጸባኦት አምላክነ